Hello and welcome to the Harry Man Show, episode 60, the big 60. We got Ryland Steen. Stein, right? Steen or Stein?
Steen.
Steen. All right. Yeah, I knew I was going to flub that up. But Ryland's been, he's a current member of the band America with all their classic hits. And if you know, you definitely know the name. He's also was a longtime member of Real Big Fish. He's also like did some studio work for and film work for bands like Maroon 5 and Audio Event. How you doing, Ryland?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you today?
Good. I'm happy you're joining us on the show. I know you were just talking about how the Disneyland was going to start with the fireworks, and kind of vivid memories of that going off all the time.
Yeah, I've been living around Orange County for about 20 years now, and I've been in Anaheim now for the last handful of years. And I never thought I would, after so many years of seeing the Disneyland fireworks night after night, I never thought I'd miss them so much after this year.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear those kind of, they almost sort of sound like artillery blasts in the distance. But then you look out and you're like, oh, there's, these beautiful fireworks.
Yeah, the animals in the area must be conditioned for it. You know what I mean? Because most animals when they hear them, they kind of get freaked out. But in that area, they must be pretty used to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to dive into it. Where it all started. So your dad was an accomplished guitar player. Was he trying to get you into guitar? Or did you just start on drums on yourself?
Yeah, well, my dad, he's a pretty good all around musician, but yeah, guitar is his main instrument, and he was a musician for many years, and then sort of when he kind of chose to go down the family route, so he ended up getting a suit and tie job, but music was always such a huge part of his life.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up with it, and I was lucky enough to grow up in a household and get a great musical upbringing. My first memories of listening to music, because my dad would always play jazz records, old rhythm and blues records, and then things like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. But I didn't even really know about like pop music or pop radio or until I was like 10 or 11, when I was able to start going over to my friend's house.
Oh wow!
And they had their own record collections, and it was when I heard Nirvana for the first time, the album Nevermind, that I remember going home, like, basically asking my dad, like, what have you been hiding from me all these years?
Like a different dimension.
Yeah. But when I look back on it now, I'm so happy that I got the sort of the musical upbringing I did, because I feel like there's a lot of people that just weren't exposed to that music, so they just don't even know. It's not even ignorance, but they just don't even know it exists. And so I feel very lucky about that. But whenever I would try and pick up a guitar of my dad's, it just seemed like it was a different language. It just didn't quite resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
But a friend of mine, so I was 12 years old at the time, and I had an older friend. He was 13 and a half. And at that age, when you're friends with an older guy, he's obviously going to be way cooler than me.
Always, yeah.
But he had a drum kit. He had a drum kit, and I got to sit down and just sort of bang on it. I had no idea what I was doing, but it just really seemed like fun. And also, I was like, oh well, I want to try and be like my older friend here. And so it's kind of funny, because the fact that I got a drum kit was almost sort of on a whim. But I guess I pleaded my case enough to my parents, because it's not even just a money thing. It's they're drums. They're loud.
It's an investment of time and energy.
And energy, but also just the idea of, just how loud they are. I mean, electronic drums weren't where they are, where they are today. They weren't anywhere close to that. So at that point, you were still buying a drum kit. And we went to this place. So I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and about 40 miles away, there was a town called Omaha, Nebraska, and they had a drum shop. It was called Joe Voda's Drum City.
Oh wow!
And I bought this. It was a CB 700 kit. I don't even know who made it or what, but it was just kind of this trashy kit that cost about $300. But I tell you what, though, just from the moment I got it, I just fell in love with it. My dad was, he knew about 3 or 4 drum beats that he would, he kind of showed me, and I would just sit there and watch him play. And then, and I would just sort of mimic it. But there was this sense of, like, right away, I kind of started, probably didn't sound good, but at least to me, I felt like I was able to get the concept down.
Yeah.
So I felt like within the first week, I was kind of able to at least play like a 1 and 3 on the kick drum, 2 and 4 on the snare, and some eighth notes on the hi hat. And for a kid who's never really seen, I guess, good results from an instrument, because I tried playing piano, none of it just didn't seem to fit with me. So to get that sort of immediate sort of satisfaction, it just every day I just started playing.
Nice. With that being said, you had a good upbringing in classic music. Was there any influences that stood out to you right away when you were learning?
Well, so my dad would make me these mixed cassette tapes of kind of easier like Beatles songs or Rolling Stone songs,
Nice.
or even bands like a band like America. I remember Sister Golden Hair and Ventura Highway being on those mixed tapes. But he would also give me just these old rhythm and blues records where you have the traditional shuffle type stuff. And I am so thankful that my dad got me going, learning how to play a shuffle from the get go, because I think that's really helped my drumming to this day, to be able to have a good swinging foundation, a foundation in swing, or the more technical talk, the dotted eighth note type drum beat.
Yeah, so you were learning feel pretty much from great music right away, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So he got me going, and then it was kind of when I was discovering Nirvana and other bands like that. That's when I started getting, so I would just play along. I can't tell you, I probably played along to the Nirvana's Nevermind record thousands of times. Like, and it's so funny because I look back now, and most people, they put headphones on and play along to a record.
Yeah.
Not me. My big idea was, so my dad had a Fender twin reverb, and so I would plug a microphone into this Fender twin reverb and put the microphone, up against the speaker of the stereo system. And so it was just kind of like my own little rock concert, because I couldn't really find anyone to play with at that point.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, so I can at least pretend like I'm jamming out here. And it was so loud. Shout out to my family members who for years just, supported me simply by not telling me to stop playing. Like I can't imagine how loud it was. Like basically, like from 3 o'clock till about 6 o'clock at night, just no one could really do anything in the house. You couldn't watch TV because I would just be banging away. And I remember my little brother, when he wanted to start playing drums, I came home one day to him playing drums, and it was so loud. And I look at my sister, I'm like, wow, that's so loud. And she's like, yeah. I go, is it that loud when I play? She goes, it's louder.
Yeah, I had a similar upbringing. I used to sneak my dad's Kenwoods out into the garage, hook him up to my radio, and try to get him back before he got home. Yeah, so yeah, we didn't have the luxury of having like nice headphones back then too, as well.
Yeah, so but yeah, my dad never pushed me though. To go back to bring it around to your original question, my dad never pushed me to play an instrument. So so I just sort of found drums through a friend of mine who I idolized at that age, and I think that was the big reason. But like I said, from the get go, I just knew it was for me. I love playing it so much, and I think straight away I realized it's only now that I look back and I realize what how therapeutic it was for me just playing drums. I never used to think of someone, like I always used to just kind of roll my eyes when people would say things like, "Oh, music saved my life," and I thought, "Oh, give me a break." But it's only but honestly though, it's only now that I look back on my life and I'm like, God, it really was music that kept me out of trouble.
Yep.
And it gave me a path. It gave me like daily goals that I was trying to meet. So it was like, I think I just sort of took for granted the positive impact that drumming and music has had on my life.
Yeah,
so
that's a very tender age where you're dealing with a lot of weird feelings, and it lets you build a personality as you go too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was on the path to becoming a troublemaker. I was on the path to like, give me another few years and I probably would have been in juvenile hall. And
oh man.
And so it's like and my parent, and I think, and it's probably, now that I think of it now, I guess, if we can turn the show into a slight therapy session,
No, that's fine.
that's probably one of the reasons. I wouldn't be surprised if my parents had told my brothers and sisters, like, don't, just let him do his thing. Like, at least we know where he is.
Yeah.
He's downstairs playing on the drums. He's not out somewhere causing trouble. So just let him play.
Yeah. And then, did you stick with the CB kit, or did your parents kind of start to invest more into in your later teen years?
So it was about 3 years later. We, I think I definitely proved myself to my parents that I was very much into the drums and loving it.
Mm-hmm.
And by then I was playing, just in high school bands with friends. But it was at 16 years old that I got I got a Yamaha Maple Custom kit.
Oh, nice.
And I just remember it was such an upgrade. And
yeah, it is.
It was so great just because getting it home that day was so shiny. And so, I mean, I still have that kit to this day. I still
nice.
use it.
Nice.
Yeah, I still use it sometimes on sessions because it's got for some reason at the time, I thought it was a good idea to get like a 20-inch kick drum.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have like where it lacks in body. At least it has some good punch to it.
Mm-hmm.
The kick drum, that is. But yeah, it was such a, I think because at that point I was trying to get more into jazz because I got a drum kit with like a 10-inch rack tom, a 12-inch rack tom, and a 14-inch floor tom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of a smaller kit. But that was definitely at the point when when I feel like things started changing, like, oh, this is great. Like, oh, you mean drums can sound this good?
Yeah. So I don't mean to jump too far ahead on you, but you said you were kind of getting to the jazz style. Was ska kind of in the picture at that point, or were you kind of just devoting to jazz?
So I wasn't really exposed to much ska music. Growing up, I definitely knew reggae. My dad would, it kind of play Bob Marley records or like Peter Tosh records.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like super deep into the reggae world, but I had heard reggae. I liked reggae. But yeah, I think because I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska, my kind of the only real ska we were exposed to, at least on a radio format, was really Sublime. That was about as close as we got.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I moved to Southern California in February 2000 that, being in the Orange County area, I was like, I even remember going like, what is this music? Like, yeah. I don't even know what I'm listening. I mean, I had heard, it kind of almost made me think of just like, almost like, because I've heard bands like Chicago, that have big horn sections, or, bands like that. And I just thought, oh, this is almost just kind of like a band like Chicago, but just faster. I just remember thinking that, even though it's really not that at all.
Yeah, and on a side note, I don't think you really know what ska is until you see it live. Especially
right.
Because I remember my first, actually, side note, I saw a Real Big Fish, I think it was a 4-year band. They were playing a place called Maverick Stadium. It was one of my first concerts, and I just remember it being so loud. And that's what got me into ska music, was actually Real Big Fish.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so when I first moved, I had the opportunity to kind of meet and become friends with the band pretty quickly. And so I started going to just ska shows around, because, even though it was 2000, it was somewhat the tail end of the ska scene, but there were still a lot of ska shows going, and I was just like, oh, this is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because it as opposed to, if someone were to just play you ska music, you might go, okay, whatever. But you're right. Yeah. It's when you go to a show and you're like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah. It's a dynamic and that poppy snare. It all kind of adds up.
Yeah. And so I just kind of started listening to Real Big Fish because they were my friends. And I thought, oh, these guys are cool. They're in a big band. And so I was still just sort of playing locally with other bands, but their drummer at the time, Carlos de la Garza, who's actually become a pretty big producer,
mm-hmm.
he was getting married and was taking like a 2-week honeymoon. So I got the chance to fill in. But the thing was, they thought I was I think they just thought I was just a nice guy and a decent drummer. But man, for anyone who's never tried to play like Real Big Fish type stuff, or like Goldfinger type stuff, or Less Than Jake type music, I found out very quickly it's not easy.
It's not. There's a lot of technique that goes into it.
Yeah, like I mean, I was a rock drummer, and I could play fast, but I was like a grunge kid growing up, so that's the sort of music I knew how to play. And so I was lucky enough to have, like, they gave me like a 3-month heads up. So I was practicing the set list that they had given me for like, a good 3 months. And it's funny because I'd been playing along to the records and practicing. So the first show, and these guys, we did one rehearsal, and they were just kind of like, yeah, cool, that's fine, whatever. Like, okay.
So correct me if I'm wrong, you actually met those guys from Ernie Ball Battle of the Bands, is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So my old band Square, we were one of the finalists, and they were on the judges panel. Mm-hmm. So and they liked our band, and that's how we got to know each other. But I just remember the first Real Big Fish show that I played. I count off the first song, and Aaron Barrett, the lead singer, immediately turns around and goes, "Too slow." but I'd been playing. I'd been playing along to the records, and most of the time, most bands, the record version, a lot of times is going to be just a little slower. It's just because there's always that natural. You're amped up a little bit for the show, and I think the crowd even wants that too. It's like, I think if bands were to play, the exact tempo of their songs, I think people would be like, "Why is everything so slow?"
Yeah. Now, did that force you to kind of work on chops, as your career kind of went with that?
Oh, absolutely. So I got through the tour. I would sort of fumble my way through the set, but we at least started and stopped at the same point.
I like how honest you are about it. It's pretty
yeah,
good.
No, it was tough. I mean, it was tough, but I think they could, like, I think I was an easy enough of a hang. Like, I'm a pretty mellow dude, so I think they liked that. But I think they saw that I was really trying. Like, I wasn't just someone like, whatever, dude. I was really. I would ask Aaron, like, on a daily basis, like, hey, what about this part in this song? And so it was. I think he liked that because, I think when you're dealing with sort of maybe like a kind of punk rock mentality, it's just sort of a, whatever, man, let's just go up and do it.
Yeah.
Whereas I was very, I'm just a very, just organized type person. I love just knowing what I'm playing when it's going to a certain spot. I love solving. I don't even know if I'd say problems, but I just love solving like, an issue, a problem, an equation, whatever. And
methodical.
I'm just a very curious person. So.
Yeah,
but
so
I got through that.
The click wasn't being pushed at that time either, right? So it was kind of just a feel thing.
Yeah, at that point, none of their records had been recorded to a click track, and
so
and there's no like tracks or click tracks or anything going for the live show. So yeah, there on a nightly basis, there was a while where it was just kind of. It used to depend on how much Red Bull Aaron had drank before the show.
Oh,
that would sort of dictate. That would dictate how fast the songs were.
Yeah, it's a different time.
Yeah, but it was fun because that was the first time. I was 21 years old. It was the first time I'd been on a bus tour on. Like, I was in heaven, and so I was like, "This is for me. I need to." So it really was, at that point, kind of. I didn't necessarily know how to set myself up to be in a position like that, but I knew one thing. I knew that the one thing that was in my control was I could practice. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that was in my control. So I just based, the money that I had, like, I was basically just living off of like macaroni and cheese and top ramen.
Oh man.
And I didn't have a car. I didn't, but I would spend as little money as possible so that I could literally just sit and practice. I just made it my job to practice, 6-8 hours a day. And I did that for like a good 10 years. But when things really turned around for me, I got to, I think, most drummers, I think are it's pretty safe to say that we're all fans of Josh Freese and his playing.
Yeah, that's a Bruce Lee drums there.
So when things really changed for me as far as because when I actually joined Real Big Fish, it was the spring of 2004. I'm sorry, spring of 2005. I joined up with them, and I was just still having problems wrapping my head around everything. Like, because it was just kind of, I feel like as we get better on our instrument, it's like, especially if we're not getting lessons from people, if we're not getting that guidance and we're just trying to figure it out on our own, it'd be that thing where, maybe I'd be studying records and think, oh, okay, why did the drummer play this at this point here? And why does it work so well? And so, but I was really struggling trying to really find, I guess, my own voice on the drums with Real Big Fish. And so because of that, when back in, I think it was 2002 or 3, but when the Vandals put out The Show Must Go Off from House of Blues, the DVD, and it's got the Josh Freese cam where it's just one angle and you could see what Josh is doing. That was like my Bible for like 2 or 3 years. I just studied that and I just kind of figured out a lot of the fills that he was playing. And it was kind of at that point when I started getting better. It was like, oh, cool. I think this is very, transmittable from the stuff that Josh is doing with the Vandals. I can kind of sneak that into all the Real Big Fish stuff. Yeah. And that was, that was when, and it was definitely my phase. I think most drummers go through that phase of the, I call it the, hey, look at me phase, where there's just way too much, overplaying.
Yeah.
And which some people love, like Aaron actually loved it when I would go off and do crazy things. And I was usually the one going, dude, it's too much. He's like, no, it's great. I want more. I'm like, more? Like,
yeah, so, my introduction to Josh was actually the first Perfect Circle record, and I listened to that thing over and over, and I couldn't even understand how he was doing some of those fills at the time.
Oh, I used to buy records of bands because he's played on so many records. I would buy records of band's records that he had played on just to study his drumming, even if it was because he played on a lot of records.
Like he played on everything from like Avril Lavigne to I think Evanescence and everybody pretty much.
Yeah. So I'd be buying these records that I didn't really like, but I'm like, well, but this guy's sort of the gold standard right now, so I got to figure out what he's doing because everyone seems to love what he's doing.
Yeah, I used to wait until he was covering Mono Drummer and just read his articles over and over. Yeah, he's one of my favorite all time. I can go on a tangent on that. But yeah, I remember the early YouTube days. It was so hard to find anything on him, and it was just like now it's a lot easier. But yeah, he's just amazing to watch too.
Yeah, he's really quite a phenom, and there's many players. I will say again, well, and to kind of talk about just for a quick second, like things like YouTube. I am in awe of the ability of some drummers, and I guess what I'm really trying to say is I feel so lucky that I've been able to play with the bands that I've played with, and because as far as my ability on the drums, I'm confident with my drumming, but there are thousands upon thousands of drummers on this planet that can run circles around me. So I definitely feel very lucky that I've been able to play with the bands and the artists that I have and do currently play with.
Now, do you feel like that encourages growth as musicians around the world, or you think it kind of hurts people, in your opinion?
I think I think anyone who's okay with a little bit of healthy competition. Personally, I see that stuff. It's discouraging and encouraging at the same time.
Yeah, I'm on the same page.
Yeah, because I think what happens is it just raises the bar.
Yeah.
So, it just simply raises the bar, and if we're up for the challenge, I think what started happening was all the music that I love and the music I love listening to. I think what started happening was because I started buying all the drum DVDs that were like, you had a drummer, these amazing drummers,
Steve
but they'd
Smith
be playing these things that I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, I am never going to use any of this, Now, with that said, some of these drummers are amazing and with what they do on their videos, so I think what happened was after about 10 or so years of practicing, I just started getting a little more inspired to try and revisit learning. It wasn't that I wanted to learn guitar; it's that I just wanted. I felt like I had started having ideas for my own songs,
Mm-hmm.
and I just didn't know how to get them out. So I was playing with an artist. He was an American Idol winner named Chris Allen,
Mm.
and I did his first tour cycle back in it was 2000. It was fall 2009 to fall 2010. I did that album cycle, and so the guitar player, his name's Andrew DeRoberts, and he's really becoming a pretty decent sized producer in the Nashville area. But he would very patiently sit down with me and say, okay, here's a G chord, here's a D chord. And, if you move your finger here, that does that. I'm like, oh, okay. But luckily, because I had the background of drumming and rhythm,
Mm.
as soon as I started being able to play some chords, like it was pretty easy for me to I feel like at this point I think I couldn't pass for an okay rhythm guitar player or a pretty decent rhythm guitar player at this point, because just the timing from drumming all these years, my timing is pretty good. So again, because I had all that experience now with the drums, I was able to go back to the guitar, strum around on it, and pretty quickly just go, oh, that's how that goes. That's how that goes. And so I think that's what happened was, instead of going down the route of, okay, I'm playing a 3-2 clave with my left foot, and I'm playing 7 against 9 on my on my right foot, like all that sort of stuff. I think I was like, I just want to learn how to make records. That seems more fun at this point.
Yeah,
And
I want to touch base on your solo stuff, but I kind of want to hear what happened when you went into the band America, which is your current gig. How long were you with Real Big Fish, and how did the America gig come about?
So I had known, one of my best friends, his name's Matt Beckley. He is the son of Jerry Beckley, one of the founding members of the band America.
Mm-hmm.
But we had just been playing in bands together as kids, Matthew and I, that is.
Mm.
And so, but Jerry used to have a guest house where he had his studio in. And so we would just kind of rehearse there, and we would record our own stuff there. And when Jerry, America was on a little break, and Jerry was making a solo album. And so he needed drums on a handful of songs. And so it was sort of that, like, well, here, it was kind of like, well, Dad, because Matt wanted to get more into the producing side of things, engineering and producing. I was still just trying to just get better as a drummer at that point. So,
mm-hmm.
So I was able to play a handful of songs on Jerry's record. So he knew I could play in that style.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just a younger guy, and their drummer, Willie Leacock, who is, God bless him, he was with him for 44 years,
Jesus.
Still alive, still doing his thing. But he was just getting to an age, because he's 10 years older than those guys. Mm-hmm. They were like 17, 18 when they started. Willie was kind of one of the veteran pro players at that point. So mm-hmm. I think he was about 10 years older. But he just wanted to retire. He was just like, guys, I got a few good years left in me, and I want to spend them on the golf course.
Nice.
So, but this was, so I got a little ahead of myself. This was 10 years after I had first met Jerry and started playing on his solo stuff. Because I would play, so over the next 10 years, I was continuing to play on his solo stuff. And then it was in 2015, 2014, I was on what ended up being my last tour with Real Big Fish. Basically, Jerry said, because he had been saying, one of these days we're going to call you up and have you, have you take Willie's place once he retires.
So but it actually pretty much already set up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, well, it was always kind of like, well, yeah, of course that'll be cool. I was like, okay, whatever. We'll see when it happens. But it was always flattering to hear him say that. But then I finally got the call, and he's like, okay, so here's the deal. And I'm like, and of course, in any industry, it's always like when someone calls you up for something, you're like, well, when do you need this by? It's always yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, I needed it yesterday. Like, okay, so. It was. I knew I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity, but I was so we were in the last 2 days of a Real Big Fish U.S. tour. We had 5 days off, and then we had like a 2 month Europe tour. So, and so within that week, uh, I was able to. So the guy Ed, I think he goes by Ed Smoky Beach, who's been with them now for 7 years.
Mhm.
Originally, I think it was just sort of like a, hey, I'm just trying to find someone to fill in on this tour. I knew I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity with America, but I was very concerned about making sure they had someone because I did after almost 10 years, I didn't want to say, hey guys, see you later, I'm out, good
No,
luck,
that's a big part of your life. You don't want to leave anyone hanging.
Yeah, so I was so happy that I was able to find Ed, and he agreed to do the tour. And man, shout out to Ed Beach. He nailed it. Like he learned those songs. So he had been playing in another ska band called Suburban Legends. So he knew how to play in that style. So, but I was like, Ed, do you think you could learn like 22 songs in a week? He's like, I'll do my best. But so so I sent Ed a set list, and then I basically and then because we were home for like we got home from that tour, so I worked with him um for about 3 days before they left for the tour.
Mhm.
And he was just nailing it. But it would just be little things like, oh, you're kind of slowing down here or whatever. Or I know Aaron really loved this specific drum fill going into this. So, but man, shout out to Ed Beach. He came in and nailed it. And he, and had he not been able to do the tour, I mean, I don't know what I would. I know myself to the point where I wouldn't have bailed on him. So I wonder if America would have said, all right, well, just give us a call in 2 months when you're home.
Oh wow,
So,
yeah, it
but
could have been a whole different change.
whole different ball game. But yeah, it was. But a quick little side story. So once I knew that I had everything, because I didn't want to say anything to the guys until I knew I had everything locked in.
Mhm.
So once I knew I had Ed locked in, and I knew that I was making this decision, so we were sound checking, and I said to after sound check, I go up to Aaron, I'm like, hey man, can I talk to you for a second? And it's always like, anytime anyone's like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? You're like, oh no.
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, sure, what's up? So I just didn't want to. I just ripped the Band-Aid off. I just said, I'm leaving the band, and he's like, what? He's just like, what? I'm like, I'm leaving. He kind of laughed, like, yeah, right, really, what's up? And I'm like, I'm leaving the band, and he's like, oh. And I tell him, it's like, that I was leaving for the band America, and he was bummed, and I very quickly told him like, hey, I got Ed Beach to fill in. He's already working on the songs, like and I'm glad that it happened as quick as it did, because I would have hated to have like had to hold on to that information for weeks, because literally it was like the night before Jerry called me going, we want you in the band. Do you want the gig? From that point to like end of sound check the next day, it was like, so I was able to kind of just get it all out
Nice.
in one go.
It was probably real surreal too at the time.
Yeah. And so, but Aaron, he was so gracious about it. Always like, well, we're going to miss you. And so he was very gracious about the whole thing. There were no harsh words, exchanged. So, I'm just,
yeah, I think that worked out for the better for everybody. But jumping into America's catalog, were you kind of like instantly kind of knowing a lot of material, or was it just a whole new process kind of going through the huge catalog?
America has some, I feel like I grew up so much with just like kind of the good old standard. Like when you listen to a song, you got, like a four, like an 8-bar verse, maybe a little 4-bar pre-chorus, and then you do the chorus, then a verse, a chorus, and bridge. America has some very interesting, because they were a band in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So bands were a little more experimental at that point. So I really had to kind of, of course I had practiced, songs like that growing up, just, thanks to my dad making me those mixtapes. But it was definitely an adjustment, because, for 10 years, I'd been playing basically as loud and as fast as I could. And now it was like, I always equate, America's music, it's just like, a glass of wine, like sitting by a fire with a glass of wine. Like that's, so it's like, it was almost like that was like my mantra. Like, okay, I need to play like I'm sitting with a glass of wine by the fire. Like, so it was like I had to learn how to be very delicate with my drumming. I had to learn how to just basically take a deep breath and not, just not play so fast.
Yeah, but
Um,
that could have been relaxing at the same time because it's not as much pressure at the same time.
yeah, and well, and I tell you what, I think one of the biggest challenges for me was kind of learning, but I'm so grateful for it because I feel like when I do studio stuff now, it really helps me out a lot. But learning how to play quietly with intensity,
Yeah.
you know, it's not the easiest thing to do, but I feel like it's dynamically. I feel like it's cool because I feel like my progression on the drums over the last handful of years, it hasn't been so much with chops.
Hmm.
It's been more like with groove and dynamic and just sort of um like I feel like lately, like when I play drums, I feel like I approach the drums and play it more like a musician rather than a drummer playing drums.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes you could tell the difference, with drummers. So I feel like I've been progressing in that way, just from a more, I guess, a musicality standpoint, rather so much as opposed to like, oh, check out these awesome chops, which by the way, I am in awe of those drummers who can do all that stuff.
Oh yeah, but I think you're growing in the right way though. I think that's actually the way I aspire to do myself.
And I think a lot of it just had to do with sort of. I mean, I'm always going to think of myself as like as a touring drummer for hire first. I feel like that's, unless something drastically changes, I feel like that's really how I see myself. Um, but at the same time, I like the idea of producing records, which I've been doing more of lately, producing artists, um, and just really, kind of diving into that world because, going back to I love solving problems or equations or puzzles. So it's like I always feel like when you're trying to make a record or produce a record with a band or an artist, it's sort of, that's really what I feel like trying to make a record is. It's like, well, where do all the pieces fit? And then sometimes when something doesn't sound right, it's like, all right, that piece isn't fitting quite right, and I feel like I'm getting better at the figuring out why something doesn't work, but there's still a lot of instances where I'm like, something's not working. I don't know what, but it's just not working.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to circle back to your solo stuff. But before I do that, you currently work out of a studio called Pot of Gold, right?
I do. Pot of Gold Studio in Orange, California.
Nice. So, are you guys always taking in new clients, and or what are some of the preferred clients you had in the, not preferred, but recent clients you had in the past?
Yeah, a lot of it. A lot of it are just local bands and artists, and I think it's mainly just. I mean, we do have a website. It's really just a website to just sort of show off the studio.
Yeah, it's
It's not a
nice.
very interactive website, but it's a lot of it. Pardon me. A lot of it is just word of mouth, and we're so my other studio partner Dave Irish, who actually he's the front house sound engineer for the band The Interrupters,
Hmm.
another newer ska punk
Yeah,
band.
they're great. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but so my partner and I, we don't always do every project together, but we do a lot of projects together, and um, it's really it sounds silly to say or almost kind of cliche, but like really just the mission statement of the studio is just every record we make, we're doing our best to make a hit record. So
Nice.
it's one of those things where kind of regardless of someone's budget, we only know how to make records one way. So and that's just the best of our ability. So um, sometimes to our own detriment, we spend a little too much time on records when someone doesn't quite have the budget that we wish they did. But it's like, it's one of those things where it's like we're putting our name to it and we're putting our stamp on it. So we want every record to be to try and be as great as possible, so that hopefully when when these artists play these for their other musician friends, they go, hopefully the idea is that, oh, this sounds great. Where'd you do this? Oh, we did it here at this studio. So um, hopefully one day we'll be one of those studios that has artists like whatever big time Lady Gaga or Ariana Grande or whatever. That would be great. But in the meantime, it's just we mainly just work with local artists, and they come in. Sometimes some people just want to do one song. Sometimes anywhere from one song to a full length album.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a lot of fun. It's very challenging, but I do have to say it's very rewarding. Especially when a record turns out. I think as we all know, sometimes when we put our best foot forward, the results aren't always exactly what we wish it was. But sometimes when we actually get to that point, like, oh, this actually sounds really good. Because I mean, everybody's different, but I know I can tend to be pretty hard on myself. So
oh yeah,
generally, whenever I listen to a project I've produced, I'm always like, it could have been better. But that gets me set up and excited for the next project because just because it's like, oh, it's another chance to try and really make that, even though the perfect record doesn't exist, but it's like it's another chance to make that perfect record.
Yeah, and then being in that situation, that kind of forced you to learn more about mixing and mastering and kind of drum mic techniques.
I've been getting a lot better at engineering and arranging. I still know nothing about mixing and mastering. That's as far as my studio partner Dave. That's his department. That's really where he comes in.
Nice.
He does any artist we do. We always give him the option. If you want us to mix it. Sometimes artists come in and they have someone else that they want to mix something and master, which is fine. But we definitely offer that service at our studio. So yeah, for me, mixing and mastering, that's still the dark art.
And that's just going to be potofgold.com, or is there something else in there I'm missing on the website name?
Yeah, well, there is potofgold.com, or if you just wanted to visit my website, it's just rylandsteen.com.
Nice.
And that's where if someone wanted to book a session with me, it's whether it's remote recording. So a lot of times people will just send me tracks and go, hey, can you put drums to this? I prefer, it's always great to have the artist in the studio because that way you can get a immediate feedback. Yeah, it's a great little clubhouse
so
hang out.
That brings me to your solo project, which I've been listening to constantly for the last 2 days. Are you playing all the instruments?
Thanks.
Are you playing? Yeah, no problem. Are you playing all the instruments on that?
I'm playing most of it. So my first band when I moved to California, it was a band called Square, and it was just a power trio. It was basically like Ben Folds 5 meets Steely Dan kind of sound. So,
yeah.
But yeah, it was just called Square, and if for anyone who wants to go searching, it's on Spotify. But the guitar player in the band was James Valentine, who has been the Maroon 5 guitar player since, I think 2002 or 3. Yeah, he's been with them for a long time.
Incredible guitar player.
Yeah, and so he played some of the more intricate guitar stuff. Another fantastic musician, his name's Dave Rosser. Him and his writing partner, they write a lot of songs for a lot of like newer hip hop and R&B artists. But he played some guitar, and then I had a bass player play on it. I still did a lot of it as my records have, as I've recorded more and more. I try and get more people involved. I used to have this real prideful idea in my head that I wanted to try and play everything, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Like if you're friends with a musician that can make your record better, maybe give them a call and have them play on it. But for the most part, it is mainly just kind of me at the studio by myself, hit and record. And then the person who mixed it, his name's Alan Hessler. He's a great. He worked on a lot of pop punk records in the early and mid 2000s.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that John Feldman recorded. John Feldman, from the singer from Goldfinger. He's a tremendous producer. So he worked with him and kind of learned from him. But yeah, it's as much as I still like, again, drumming is still my number one thing that I love, but it's been really exciting being able to just sort of work on other aspects of my of music. And it's nice to be able to pick up a guitar and just sort of strum, or working with an artist when it's like, oh wait, what part is that? Oh, okay. And I feel like it's really set me up to when I feel like there was a long time when I'd be drumming. I feel like I was always like searching. And what I mean by that is it's like I was always like, oh, a drum fill should go here, or I should do this here, or I should do that there. But I was always questioning myself as to whether it was the right decision.
Hmm.
Whereas, because I was always just listening to the drums. And, I was listening to the other musicians to try and lock in, but at the end of the day, I wasn't listening to the songs.
Yeah.
And I think that was one great thing about starting to finally write my own music, which was I was more focused on the vocals or, there's a lead guitar part here. What's that doing? And really just cueing off of what everyone else was doing rather than trying to me as the drummer dictate to the other musicians, no, you should be doing, kind of playing with me. So again, once I sort of, I felt like I don't know if I've fully crossed the bridge, but I'm at least on the bridge, kind of crossing it of just like, oh, you mean, and but just little things like so I feel like drumming has been a lot more fun nowadays. Not that I wasn't having fun, but I feel like I'm not. I used to get so down on myself for not playing exactly the way I had in my head. Whereas now I'm like, I'm just gonna play music because it's just fun. Like, and I don't get fixated on is every snare drum hit perfect? Did I execute that fill perfectly? It's like, well, does it sound good in the song? Yeah. Okay, there you go. Like, fine.
Yeah, it is what it is. You know what I mean? So,
Um,
yeah, so the best, I've been listening on YouTube. What would you recommend checking out on Spotify? I highly recommend checking it out, by the way.
of my own stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, it's on every streaming platform. So it's just the under the artist name. It's just my name, Ryland Steen,
Hmm.
and the album the album name. There's only one album, but it's called Zotoro. But I spelled it with an X. I don't know why. It just sounded like a cool word. Like 'cause
Yeah.
some people ask me, oh, does it mean anything? I'm like, nope, nothing. I just loved how it looked. It was just an XOTO RO, and it's just I like how the word sounded. But yeah, when people look at it, they're like, Exo Toro? I'm like, well, sure, whatever. And well, and also I think I was trying to be clever and think, oh, well, if anyone ever Googled this record or that word, hopefully my record would be the first thing that came up because at this point I don't think anything really comes up if you Google it.
You
But
got me curious. I'll try it out.
yeah, but it's on every streaming platform. And also the songs are on YouTube as well. I mean, anyone can access YouTube,
Hmm.
or anyone with an internet connection can access YouTube.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just Ryland Steen, and the album is called Zotoro, and it's sort of like it's a mix of influences. But I do have to say, like, I'm always been a big fan of. I've been a big fan of many bands, but this record, I almost feel like I was listening to a lot of Jimmy Eat World and a lot of Muse at the
Oh,
time.
good stuff.
So I don't know. Some people might be able to hear those influences, but definitely sort of I guess, kind of a power pop rock record.
Nice. I'm really, like I said, genuinely really digging it. I'm enjoying it a lot. But I have to say, thanks for coming on the show, Ryland. I feel like we left a lot of stuff out. I'd love to have you again sometime if that's all right with you.
It's so funny. Well, for one, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's funny because I normally consider myself sort of an introvert and somewhat of a quiet person, but for some reason, I can definitely ramble and not shut up.
No, I'm digging. You're making it easier for me, to be honest with you. But yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like there's a lot of subjects we could have talked about. I was thinking in my head, but yeah, I think this is a good part one of the Ryland Steen show. So
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The last time I did something with some friends, they have their own deal called the Elk Lodge. I think we ended up talking for 2.5 hours. I'm like, are you going to cut that down? They're like, nah, we're just going to put it up.
No, definitely no cutting down here. I actually want to touch base more on your touring and your stuff you're doing with America. So I feel like there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. So next time we'll get that. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, now that sort of things are, as long as I suppose as long as we don't have any real setbacks globally speaking, it looks like touring is going to start happening for a lot of bands, and we're one of them. Yeah, I think starting early August we're going to be getting back at it. So yeah, it'd be certainly fun to either have you come out to a show and maybe we can do another, talk then.
Absolutely, we'll do that. I'll be there, man. So thanks a
All
lot,
right.
Ryan. I'll talk to you soon here.
All right. Sounds good.